I'm happiest in the saddle.
A fellow sportsman.
I am an FBI agent.
Hey, stop.
What do you say we cut the chit-chat? A-hole.
Dogs and cats living together. Mass hysteria.
Come with me if you want to live.
Hello, and welcome to Retro Ramble. I'm Charlie McGee.
I'm George McGee.
And this time, dear listeners, George and I are rambling back all the way to 1985 to review one of our most favorite films ever, that is Rambo First Blood Part 2. Have I said the title correctly? Because we never used to care.
You never used to care, just used to call it Rambo 2.
Yeah.
But yes, you have called it the right name. And yes, it is the bestest movie ever. It was definitely my favourite film when I was 10 years old. I went through a Rambo phase of being obsessed with this movie, but we can get it.
And it's what every 8, 9, 10-year-old should be watching. I think it's where the world went wrong. So, George, what can listeners expect to hear in this episode when we go back to 1985 for John Rambo's revisit to Vietnam?
I think if you haven't listened to Retro Ramble 4, so Charlie and I are brothers. We're an independent film podcast, and the point of this podcast is that Charlie and I go back and look at the films that we grew up with, the films of our youth, and look at how they did at the time, how they hold up now, have they been remade or spun off into or rebooted into a series of some sort. It's a lighthearted look back at these films. It's a bit like catching up with an old friend. So yes, in this episode, there's likely to be some bad impressions, maybe some childish humour and potentially some swearing. But at the end of the day, we aim to entertain.
But no more swearing than when we were 8 or 9 or 10 years old.
There's not that much swearing in this, actually. It's, I think you were saying you showed it to your son, and it was fairly... too much of a tough watch.
Both of my children.
Wow.
8 and 5 years old, and at the end, Mia was like, "Go Rambo!" There's actually nothing really that damaging for kids, because even in the torture scene, he says, it doesn't get that bad.
There's a couple of stabbings, but apart from that, it's all very comic booky.
As my son pointed out, because he is at the age that we obviously were, he's like, "Yeah, but Daddy, it's just ketchup." I was like, "That's right, it's not real." And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why it's totally acceptable to watch Rambo First Blood Part 2 with your 8-year-old son. So, without further ado, George, do you want to cover who directed this, who's in it? I think there's an actor everybody will know in this. It's Richard Crenna. No.
Richard Crenna. Yes, the delightful. It is, was it Martin Cove from...
Karate Kid.
And Cobra Kai. No, obviously Sylvester Stallone. It's a George P. Cosmatos movie. But yes, we'll get into that after the trailer.
Okay, so all the usual features, lots to look forward to. Sit back, open up your ears and close your eyes as we retro ramble on Rambo First Blood Part 2. George, roll the trailer.
Joined Army 6 June 69. Accepted Special Forces. Helicopter and language qualified. Expert in light weapons and guerrilla warfare. Sylvester Stallone is back as Rambo. Rambo's the best combat vet I've ever seen. His mission, to locate American POWs in Vietnam.
Think you'll find someone? POWs? Doubtful.
His orders, not to engage the enemy.
He's got 36 hours to complete the mission and reach the extraction point. We're going down! You're not going anywhere.
I'm telling you to to abort, double-crossed, and left behind enemy lines.
You're the one who's making the mistake.
Yeah, what mistake? Rambo. And now, he's getting out any way he can. Rambo, what most people call hell, he calls home. No man, no law, no war can stop him. Sylvester Stallone is back as Rambo. First Blood, Part 2.
My God, I could listen to that all day. It's like the Rocky track. Just running to that is like, ba, ba. Yeah. So yeah, after showing this to my kids, the one thing that, luckily, that they wouldn't shut up about was the music. They did. I think that was the most powerful part of Rambo to them, was the explosions and the music. Dun, 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 dun.
It's very rousing. It's very rousing. I know that. I'm just jumping straight into first memories here. For me, like, you talked about it in the past, that whole like muscle memory, and with music, it's so much stuff of your memory is tied to music. And for me, it was the musical stuff that like was triggering nostalgia for me. It was like, oh yeah, I remember this bit. And cause I watched this on repeat for like a couple of years. And whilst I remember a lot of the dialogue and all the key action scenes, it was the soundtrack that really stands out.
I feel like Predator and Commando are a bit like that, because we watched those so much on repeat when we were younger, and then we went into them big time. I think I went through a Vietnam War phase when DVDs were around. I was like watching Platoon. There was a few, there was like, and it was
slightly less silly Vietnam stuff. Platoon,
not as fun. Platoon, by the way. For God's sake, don't watch that with your 8-year-old. No. Yeah, I just have. I think what our listeners would probably like to hear is that this is one of those films, clearly, as you could imagine, is one that you and I have watched a lot. Like at every juncture in our life, when we first discovered it, preteen, when we were teenagers, when we were students, and as fully grown adults, we have never stopped respecting this outing by Sylvester Stallone as Rambo, John Rambo.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think I've owned it on multiple formats, in terms of, I think I actually had I don't know if it was just a long-term loan off James Glendinning, our old neighbour, but I definitely had the original video cassette. It wasn't taped off TV, because I remember the box for it. It was one of the first DVDs I bought. Obviously, I didn't buy the box set. I just went straight for Rambo 2.
Yeah, and I think we definitely covered this. So just for you long-time listeners, you will know that we've obviously covered Rambo First Blood. A bit of a revelation for me, because I hadn't watched it for a long time, or maybe it was ever.
Yeah.
But that was...
We did mention it then. Yeah.
That we started with this one.
Yeah.
A bit like Aliens.
Because it's the first one's pretty boring. There's not much that happens in it.
What's good about the second one?
Great.
What's good about the second one? It's more recent. Okay.
It's more recent, and he blows up. There's a lot more explosions.
There's more death. There's more explosions. So
there's a lot. Well, I don't think he doesn't. He doesn't kill anyone. There's one accidental death in First Blood.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, and it's not even his fault. It's totally misunderstood. Misunderstood. Yeah.
And I'm not sure the kill count on this, but it's right up there.
It's impressive. So before George goes into how we got this film, let me tell you where we were when this film came out. So as you probably know from Retro Ramble history, there were some amazing films that were out. George, you want to name a few of them? There was,
so 1985.
Obviously, let's just start off the top. Back to the Future, whose logo we have
appropriated
for our own logo. But it is kind of looking back from the future as our tagline. So Back to the Future was 1985.
Yeah, there was Back to the Future. There was A View to a Kill with our friend Roger Moore.
Yeah, Chris Walken.
But then there was a lot of big 80s films. So there was Weird Science, there was The Breakfast Club, St. Elmo's Fire. Obviously, this was a double whammy for Stallone. So I think this was released in the summer, and then he did Rocky IV again, which we've covered on the podcast, which I think came out Christmas time or November time. I'm sure I'm missing, there's a few more. I think was it Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome? Good old Tina.
Yeah, I mean, there was Mad Max, wrestling was big, Super Mario Brothers had just come out, but can I just give you some selections of the international top 10? So top 10, if you might remember, is how we used to rank music. So I think I should do like a countdown from number 10. So at number 10, we have Take On Me by
Tune. Aha.
Right. Number 9, Crazy for You by Madonna. Number 8, Money for Nothing, Dire Straits.
What a tune.
7, Everybody Wants to Rule the World, Tears for Fears.
Great tune.
Number 6, You're Out of Touch, Hall & Oates. And then...
My goodness, I think I've got all of these.
George, number 5, Shaka Khan. Shaka Khan.
I feel for you.
I feel for you. There's number 4 is I Want You to Show Me. I Want to Know Where Love Is by Foreigner. Now get this. How is this for a top 3? 2 people appearing twice in the same top 10. So Wake Me Up Before You Go by Wham. Like a Virgin by Madonna. And at number 1, Careless Whisper by George Michael.
What a top 10.
I mean, listen to those names. So we were spoiled. And to echo, no mobile phones, no social media. We had to remember stuff. Pictures came with touch. We were gods. It was a different time.
Different time. What a time to be alive.
Absolutely. All it was about was picking up an AK-47 or an MG off a nearby helicopter and bringing justice to those who deserved it. So now that we know where we are, George, how do we get this film?
So this is another Carolco film. Andy Wagner and Mario Casar. Obviously, they made the first film. They would go on to make a lot of our favorite films, a lot of the Retro Ramble top 10. So obviously they brought us Terminator, Total Recall. I want to say, the Terminator 2, they brought, that was one of their biggest films. Universal Soldier was one of theirs. They were selling the film rights, the international film rights, as early as 1983, and with a planned release date of 1984, but then it pushed into 1985. Poor old Sly was having a bit of a dip in his career. So Stallone, obviously, with the first Rambo, with First Blood, he got a lot of critical acclaim for his acting in that. They said, wow, this guy can really act, even though obviously, it's a tour de force in Rocky.
Yeah.
And I think he did Rocky 3 the same year as First Blood. But after that, he took a bit of a dip. So 1983, he directed Staying Alive, the Saturday Night Fever sequel with John Travolta.
Is that the one with the weird rape scene in at the end, or is that the first one?
I can't remember. I don't.
Not a fun film. It's not a fun film.
I don't think I've seen all of Saturday Night Fever. That might be one for the Retro Ramble Revelations. But yeah, Staying Alive is a sequel, and apparently it was critically panned, but it was commercially successful. I think it got into the top 10 for 1983 for the US box office. So it didn't do too badly, but I think obviously Sly takes these things personally. And then 1984, he tried to do something different, and he co-wrote and starred in Rhinestone, which was a country music rom-com with music, and he sung in that alongside Dolly Parton.
Budweiser, you created a monster, and they call him Frankenstein. And the tavern down the street is the laboratory where he makes the transformation bitches all the time.
What?
And I think that was a bit of a stinker. So yeah, I think he was kind of looking for a hit, and I say, it was quite a year for him with Rambo, First Blood Part 2. But again, showing Sly's, whether it's his ego or his savviness, he decided the film should be retitled Rambo: First Blood Part 2. A bit like he wanted to put like the Rocky series, he wanted the title character, and then that way he could go on and and then it just morphed into Rambo 3, Rambo.
And then John Rambo.
John Rambo, and then John Rambo Jr., and then Last Blood. Was it last year? Is it Rambo Last Blood? I think is which I still haven't seen. There was a spec script written by Kevin Jarr, and his name's come up before. I think he was the original writer on Tombstone, and I think he wrote some other stuff. So he did the first pass, which was based on the idea of rescuing the POWs, going back to Vietnam. Then the official scripting duties went to some guy called James Cameron, who... We've covered this on other episodes, I think on our Terminator episode earlier in the year. But whilst there was delays whilst they were prepping for Terminator, I think Arnie had to complete the Conan sequel. So they had to push back Terminator. So whilst he was waiting for Arnie to free up, James Cameron was in demand. And at the same time, he was writing Rambo: First Blood Part 2 and a film called Aliens, which obviously he would go on to direct as well. So yes, he was basically working on 3 films, or at least 2 scripts and 1 film at the same time. And his Cameron's script was called First Blood 2: The Mission. And his idea had Rambo paired with a humorous sidekick, a techie sidekick. But he also fleshed out the prisoners of war, and they all had backstories which would be revealed over the course of the film. I'm kind of giving you an early coulda, woulda, shoulda, because his humorous techie sidekick was going to be played by none other than John Travolta. That's who the producers wanted. So obviously Stallone had just directed Travolta in Staying Alive. But funnily enough, and I don't know if I brought this up in coulda, woulda, shoulda for First Blood, but Travolta's name was in the mix originally for Rambo.
Wow. His best friend's a talking dancer.
He's a sexy dancer.
He's a sexy techie dancer. What's interesting about that is I'm a bit unsure. It's like Cameron's doing some writing and Stallone's doing some rewriting. Is that what you're telling me?
So that's what I'm about to get to. So Stallone takes Cameron's script and in true Stallone fashion rewrites it to his strengths. So Kevin Jarr says defensively, almost nothing of his original screenplay ended up in the final script, but he still gets a story credit. Cameron would comment, the only thing that Stallone kept was the action, and Stallone added in all the politics in it. But I've got a corker of a response from Stallone on this. So it was just more than politics that were put into the script. There was also simply a storyline. If James Cameron says anything more than that, then he realizes he's now doing the backstroke badly in a pool of lies.
That's showing his writing talent and giving a diss. Respect.
Exactly.
Respect.
So, original director Ted Kotcheff, so the guy who directed First Blood, was only really interested in seeing the emotional side of the character and felt that the script that he was presented kind of jettisoned a lot of the nuance and emotional side. So he wasn't interested in returning. So Stallone hired George P. Cosmatos, who he would go to work on again with one of our newly discovered favorites, Cobra.
Amazing.
Some say Cosmatos is a bit of a director for hire because a lot of the rumors are that Stallone pretty much directed that. And Cosmatos also directed Tombstone, where a lot of people say Kurt Russell actually directed.
It's almost like if you're a big actor and you don't like the director and you want a director who'll do exactly what you say, You got to go to Cosmatos.
Yeah.
Okay.
But interestingly, I was reading this is the director of photography, or the cinematography for this film is by a British guy called Jack Cardiff, who is credited as one of the greatest cinematographers of all time. He did loads of work in the 50s and 60s, so some classic British films, The Red Shoes, A Matter of Life and Death. There's a Bogart and Hepburn movie, African Queen. And he ended up being the cinematographer on this, but it was purely by chance because their original DOP fell ill just before filming. And Stephen Burkoff, another Brit who obviously plays the evil Russian in this, discovered purely by chance through a friend that Jack Cardiff, the cinematographer, was on holiday in Mexico at the time. So they reached out to him and were like, do you want to make this film? He's like, I'm just on holiday. And they're like, it's 6 weeks work and Stallone will pay you really well. And he's like, oh, okay then. So yes, they have this Oscar-winning, one of the best cinematographers. They're basically, like the Roger Deakins of the time, making this action film.
But maybe, to be fair to Cosmatos, maybe he's very good at assembling the right team. So that's why.
So.
It's like he's the different type of director. He's not like, I need to make it my way. He just assembles great people to make great pictures.
Yeah, and I mean, I watched one of his films recently. He did, before this, he did Escape to Athena, which is like a World War II romp. Bizarrely, it's got a very much against type Roger Moore playing a Nazi officer, but then it's got Telly Savalas, Richard Roundtree, Elliot Gould, Sonny Bono. It's one of those like ones where, those ensemble World War II adventures. And I think in Roger's memoir, he did it just so he could go spend a summer in Greece with Telly Savalas. He didn't really care what the film was. But it's a World War II romp. And yes, there's a lot better films that do it. But in terms of a sense of adventure and action, it has got some good action. And I think that's it with this. And I think with Cobra, and as you say, I think he knows how to stage an action set piece.
They're not bad. I don't see him attached to any bad films. We say what you want about the directing style or maybe encouraging strong actors to have that say, but he makes great films that we enjoy anyway.
Yes, and also Cobra. A few other things that I don't want to shatter any illusions, but this was actually filmed in Acapulco in Mexico, not Vietnam and Thailand.
Right, going loco.
I think that was more down to logistics in terms of getting, rather than flying crew halfway across the world, it was a little bit closer just to go to Mexico. However, they still had to deal with flooding, snakes, scorpions, heat stroke, and apparently a lot of bribes, a lot of grease payments, they say in the making of.
You want to get home safely, you give us money, or you buy some weed.
Yeah, so, you need to get these, sort of like, there's machinery in. Oh, well, it's held up at customs, but you can speed it up.
It'd be really bad if something was to happen to these lovely cameras.
And a little bit of background about Stallone. I think we'll get into this. He looks phenomenal in this. I mean, and obviously
prepping for Rocky, though. Let's just talk, because in Rocky 4 he also looks phenomenal.
Yeah, we talked about that in Rocky about how there's muscles that you didn't even know existed.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't go totally homo, but we got close.
But apparently he did 8 months of training, 4 hours a day, and that also included, unsurprisingly, archery and SWAT training.
Yeah, especially the archery. I mean, that's probably one of the best, but explosive bow and arrows. Imagine.
Yes. So, despite mixed reviews, it made an estimated $150 million in the United States, becoming the second highest grossing film at the domestic box office and the third highest grossing film worldwide in 1985.
Can I also just tell you a few more hits that were out? Can I just give you the next 10? Because
Are we back to music?
No, but just listen to this, right? So, number 11, Every Time You Go Away by Paul Young. Mm-hmm. Number 12, Easy Lover, Phil Collins. Number 13, Can't Fight This Feeling, REO Speedwagon.
Wowzers.
14, Starship, We Built This City. 15, The Power of Love, Huey Lewis. 16, Don't You Forget About Me by Simple Minds. 17, Cherish by Kool and the Gang, then St. Elmo's Fire. 19, The Heat Is On by Glenn Frey.
Glenn Frey.
20, We Are the World by USA for Africa. And then
that's
it goes
why
on. There's Part-Time Lover, Shout, Everything She Wants by Wham. Wham's in the top 30 3 times. Anyway, a crazy time.
A good year to buy a Now album.
Shall we talk about the movie?
Yeah, maybe. So, what a movie! The end. But no, we've talked about the score. It's that opening. I love that opening bit of. I need that as like a ringtone or something. And then the title in flames. It's Jerry Goldsmith at his best. I mean, we've waxed lyrical about his film soundtracks before, but it's amazing.
My kids did not know what I was going on about because I was like, guys, this is really good. I was like, da-na-na-na, da-na-na. And they're like, what? And he's like, it's just tension building and it just builds up to this crescendo and then it just drops it and it's like, ba, ba. Da, 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 and they keep it going through. And this is, am I right? Stallone's brother's track from the original one.
Oh, yeah. By the way, we're totally going to fade out the podcast to Peace and Love.
Yeah.
Come on, brother, write a song.
So, yeah, where do you start with this? Like, one thing I think I would like to mention is that for years, George and I watched this film, and it started with Rambo in prison. And Troutman turns up. And it was always like, that's the start of Rambo 2. That's the start of Rambo 2. And it was only this time that it clocked us out. It's because of what he did in the first one.
But interestingly, one thing I forgot to mention in the Cameron script, where does he start off in the Cameron script? In a mental asylum, in a mental institution. So that idea would crop up in a sequel for Cameron, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So there's that, and he's a man, a few words. I think they keep the character going. I think what's impressive is they managed to keep him the same, but they turn everything else up to 11.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the interesting thing about this film is that I've watched this film so much, and then to go back and watch the first film, it's such a weird sort of juxtaposition of the first film feels so small. Like they're so like in terms of the ramp up between sequel and original, it must be up there. And again, we probably talked about this when we covered First Blood, but it's such a genre sidestep. It's not like, well, I suppose it's similar in a way from Alien to Aliens, like upping the action, but they are. It's weird, as you say, they keep the character of Rambo intact, even though despite having severe post-traumatic trauma from Vietnam, he doesn't have an issue going back to Vietnam. That's because I suppose he's confronting his fears. And do we get to win this time?
I'm still alive. No, I think but remember, like in the first film, there is some great action. You know, he's being chased. There's a helicopter. There's tons of stuff that happens, and then it's like, what would happen if our most trained Vietnam veteran went nuts? Nuts in the US? How would we deal with it? So it's a very much discussion about the societal impact and the psychology, you know, PTSD on blah, 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 blah. And this is, okay, yeah, but we want to make money and we want a lot of product placement. We need a lot more explosions. And we really want to delve in. It's like, well, where could we send Rambo? It's like, we could send it back to Nam. There's nobody in Nam. What if there was? So I love that idea. It's like, we're going to send him back into the place that he feared the most.
Well, that's the thing. It's reading. I did a bit of research on it, and apparently there's it was a bit of a mini genre. The whole the POW subplot and the going back to Nam. So apparently there's 1983. There was a Gene Hackman film called Uncommon Valor. And then there was obviously Chuck Norris's Missing in Action series, which started in 1984. And yeah, I think there was a lot of stuff in the press. So apparently it is based. There is some
there were POWs basically.
Well, there was a lot of press surrounding could there be POWs, and there was talk of like Delta Force commandos preparing for a possible mission, and there was a lot of stuff in the media, and apparently there was like over 2,000 people still missing in action or unaccounted bodies. But the Paris Peace Accords happened in 1973, and all the POWs were released then. But because there was still over 2,000 people missing, there was still this like false hope of, oh, well, potentially they're still keeping people there. But there's the whole point of why would you keep people there? If it's, I think in this, they're saying it's for, repatriations, they're holding on to them for money. Yeah. So there is some based in some fact, but by all accounts, it seems like the whole thing of there being POWs still in Vietnam in the early 80s is a myth.
What I like about this film is I do like the simplicity. And I think you've got to cast your mind back to where we were back then. We'd never had a war film like this. These films, this and Commando, would go down. And I remember our parents categorize, say, oh, it's the one-man army. It's totally unbelievable. But they were a certain film of their time, but nothing like them had come before. It's like, yeah, you don't need a team of commandos. Send in somebody who looks like a massive, big unit and give him a big gun and make it believable. But it's very believable. And with Rambo, you'd already had the first film where he'd shown what he could do in British Columbia, and I enjoy the plot. It is relatively straightforward. Photographs.
But no, it's a very short film. I mean, it's at 92 minutes or something. So it gets there's
beautifully economic.
Yeah, there's no beating around the bush. It's sort of like, okay, we need you back. Here's the airbase. Here's the bureaucrat you can't trust. Here's your mission. Here's all your gear.
Here's a can of Coke.
Here's a can of Coke, postman. But I love that plot point of you see him with all these weapons and he loses them all apart from his trusty knife, massive knife, and obviously the legendary bow and arrow.
Yeah, very pragmatic. And my son could not get his head around this knife. He's like, the knife, is it real? Can you get them? I was like, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't use it around the kitchen, but yes. And I think he lost his mind when he cut through the fence with it. I was like, I kind of think that's possible.
So apparently I've got some knife facts.
Okay.
The Washington Post reported in the summer of 1985 that hunting stores were bombarded by customers looking for the 10-inch survival knife used by Rambo. Stores that sold the models with smaller blades reported an uptick in sales. Before the two movies, somebody from Remington Shavers and Knives sold one survival knife a month. After Rambo First Blood Part 2, he averaged selling 50 knives a month.
Wow. There was a knife
frenzy.
Knife frenzy, knife-ageddon. So yeah, it was zeitgeisty at the time. And when would Commando come out?
The same year. So that's what we need to talk about. And I think we should talk about in the end, or I don't know if you want to talk about now how they compare, because you mentioned the whole one-man army thing. And I think they're the two films that cemented that. And obviously Commando was such a foundational film for cementing Stallone, for Schwarzenegger's career and cementing him as an action hero. And in the same way, they both of these films, Commando and Rambo First Blood Part 2, launched them as action stars, I suppose, because before then you could argue Stallone was a dramatic actor.
I think that it probably sounds strange for me to say it, but at this point, Stallone was defining a wider range. He was like, I can do drama, I can be the underdog that you believe can beat the bigger prize, and I can also make you believe that I can take on an army by myself.
Yeah.
So, I think, but I don't know how to put it, but comparing the two, I think the word to go for is just tone. I feel like the tone of the film, funnily enough, something you'll hear George and I say a lot about Sylvester Stallone films, this film seems to take itself a wee bit more seriously than Commando does.
Absolutely. I mean, in terms of this film, I've used the term feels very comic booky, but it is a serious film. It's dealing with serious issues, with real world issues. I say people were discussing the fact it was a topic in the press, whereas Commando, it feels like, yes, this is ridiculous, and we know it is. This guy's flipping cars. This guy's taking on, an army of security guards,
jumping off a plane that's taking off.
But and they know it's larger than life. Whereas, this feels, it's like, yes, we're doing the same, but we're taking it seriously.
But also check out my pecs. And in Commando, it's like, check out my pecs. So, very.
Well, there's a great in the behind the scenes. So Julia Nixon, who plays is it Bao or is it Ko, the love interest, the Vietnamese, it's just the lady that gets fridge, that gets killed to spur Rambo on. She even said in the behind the scenes, she said, it's one of the few movies where the guy looks better than the girl.
Yeah, because she was all sweaty and downtrodden. And
I mean, she's beautiful and she's great in this.
I would take her to America.
I would certainly take her to America.
You not expendable, Rambo. I love the little beat. It's like because it is like out of the mouths of babes. Like as you're watching that scene, my son's like, so she's Rambo's girlfriend now? And I just looked at him and was like, let's just watch what happens. And it's like the next scene, pretty much the next scene, we've established her as a love interest, and through a crisis of conscience, boom, she's dead. Okay, now we can continue with Act 3.
But let's jump back. That's where I learned the word expendable, was because of Rambo. Like, you invade a party, you don't show, don't matter. But then, obviously, years later, we get the Expendables. So it's obviously a favourite word of Stallone's.
Well, it's just, I think for me, that shows like what matters to him most. Like he went back to the Rocky franchise and he did that. And then he went
back to the Rambo franchise and did that.
And then it's like, so what can I do? It's like, well, how can I? So it's a smart move by him. So let me just say this just once. He's obviously a very smart guy. Both him and Schwarzenegger are intelligent people. They know how to make money. They know how to be successful. They've both made a lot of money. They've both been very successful. They've both taken very disciplinary actions on taking care of themselves and buffing up. And it's just interesting to see the life choices they make, the films they make, the series that they are behind. They're still making stuff. You've got Tulsa King. You've got Fubar. They're still very much being held accountable to the brands they created back then.
Yeah, absolutely. You can tell like how dedicated he is in terms of the thing I felt about watching this film. None of it felt too hokey in terms of all the stunts, the effects, everything. Like nothing looked like, oh, that's dated. I mean, obviously some of the politics and the stylings of it have, but in terms of the visuals and how it all looks, and as we've touched on, it's got one of the best cinematographers that lived working on it. It does look phenomenal.
And I mean, it looks great. It's economic.
So much explosions as well. I forgot about
him going nuts in the helicopter, because I did too.
Yeah, there's that bit that we're destroying the whole like camp, but then there's the bit where he's using the bow and arrow and the fields, and this is like, just keep sending more troops. Keep sending. It's like, where are all these guys coming from? Keep sending more.
We must hunt him down.
And how explosive are those arrows? Because they seem to like really, for something so small, create huge explosions. I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining. It looks amazing.
I've already tried to find them online, but you can't buy them. But like just the most amount of compressed C4 with some sort of detonator in its tip. Don't worry about it. They're amazing.
And then there's that bomb on the waterfall that seems to explode on multiple levels. It's like, what?
So many gasoline fumes were used for that. So I think I would struggle to improve upon this film. But in a new type of feature, before we get to coulda, woulda, shoulda, let's talk about retro reshoots. George, if anywhere could you improve upon this film, looking back at it now, what do you think could be done differently? Obviously not the soundtrack, obviously not the lead actor. What would you change, if anything at all?
Absolutely nothing. The end.
end.
No, I was thinking about this.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, how's it, going back to how does it compare to Commando? Something we haven't really touched on in this is the villain in this. Obviously, you could say Murdoch is the true villain in this, but Steven Berkoff as the hammy Russian bad guy repeating his duties from Octopussy. He turns up really late in the film. He has his Russian heavy. There's the torture scene, but for me that doesn't really lead. And especially if you look back at First Blood, with the whole thing with Brian Dennehy, is like a immovable object and unstoppable force. Like Brian Dennehy won't back down, and he's a great antagonist.
Proper
and I feel and I feel in this, it's not a great villain, especially compared to Commando. I mean, what a villain in that, John. Especially again in Commando, though, Vernon Wells.
He's the henchman.
He's the henchman, and he's kind of drip fed throughout the film, but
until the final showdown. And then,
but it's a great showdown, isn't it?
Yeah, and you've also, but I think that what Commando does better is you've got the big boss is a pantomime guy.
Yeah, it's a bit like the Bond thing, isn't it?
It is, and but it's the henchman showdown.
Yeah.
And I totally agree with you. Like, if I was to think of a retro reshoot, what could be better? I do think there's a pacing thing going on because it's like, for me, the highlight of this film is when they discover the camp. And it's just before he gets captured, and he's taking out the guys and there's stuff like that. And then there's a real pacing issue because he goes to the camp, he goes away, he comes back again. I'm not saying it's writing, but something else could have been better. Like, it's almost like, as you say, sorry, I forget his name, the English actor.
What in this?
Beverly Hills Cop.
Steven Berkoff.
Berkoff isn't given enough of a bad guy. You and I always talk about it. To really understand how bad somebody is and about how bad a bad guy is in the film, we need to see him kill one of his own men. And I didn't feel there was enough of that. There wasn't enough creating. He just kind of turned up. You see all of these Ruskies, damn Russians, coming off the enormous helicopter. They don't seem to become much fodder. I think they just get exploded. So yeah, for me, there's another scene. Like, I think we've been spoiled in recent films. I don't know why I compare it to it, but it's probably why I love the franchise so much. But I think of this film and I think of something more modern like John Wick. And it's like that. They're like, no, we're going to have loads of people dying here, loads of people dying here, him struggling here, loads of people dying here, loads of people, so it's really well structured. And I think it needs a bit more of that pacing, like what you were saying, where let's throw people at it, then he can hide, he can catch his breath, and so can the audience. Yeah. I feel like it's a pacing thing if I was to look back at it and suggest any improvements now. But I'm not talking about changing anything. I'm talking about, I guess you would call editing, maybe. Yeah. Maybe a couple of scenes chucked in to break down or stretch out certain bits or develop Berkoff's character a little bit.
Yeah, the other thing I just thought about today is that there may be, and probably if this film was remade in any way today, they would probably ramp up the character, the female character, and they wouldn't have killed her off. It's a term in film and TV known as fridging. You're giving the hero motivation, but Rambo doesn't need that motivation because for him, it's like it's getting even with Vietnam. Essentially, it's rescuing the POWs and venting his frustration on that war. So George, it's almost like
he's still alive. It's still alive.
Exactly. I'm love. It's still love.
Do we get to win this time?
How you gonna live, Johnny? do by do. So I mean, imagine if she was a badass and taking out people, them working together right till the end.
Yeah, her being like Halle Berry, kick-ass type thing.
And then she's like, actually, I don't want to go to America with you because you're a bit of a psycho.
you're fucking nuts. You're obsessed with your knife.
Rambo, you're a bit crazy.
You cray-cray. I don't want to settle down with you. I'm going to go back to Hong Kong. But no, I also think just to go back to Berkoff, is that his only real qualm with Rambo is that he's an American soldier. For me, and on today's standards, that's not enough. So
Yeah.
I think to be fair with retro reshoots, we're talking about remaking it today. I think that's only fair because I think Rambo First Blood Part 2 stands up perfectly well.
It's a product of its time.
Exactly. So, but in today's world, there has to be more of a connection. There has to be more of a gripe between Burkoff and Rambo for this to work.
Backstory, they were at college together.
Or there's a connection, maybe, I don't know, maybe Murdoch's buying drugs is actually helping the drugs go. Maybe they're working together. There has to be something.
Yeah.
Because he goes on 2 vengeance missions, maybe even 3 in the same film. He's like...
Yeah. But that's going back to Murdoch and the great Charles Napier, who also crops up as in the Blues Brothers.
Yeah.
We're the good old boys. But it's funny because this film gets, lambasted for being pro-Reagan and pro-right wing. But
Shut up.
But I was reading an interesting article, I think it was in Uproxx, that pointed out that in this actually it's the villains in it are the government. It's the fact that Murdoch and the higher ups are trying to cover it up and trying to squash that. Oh no, we're not paying these repatriations. We're not paying this money to the families. There's nobody there. They're all gone.
The mission's a smokescreen.
Exactly. So and that's it. That revenge mission, that ultimate villain of him taking out at the end,
sticking it to the man.
Sticking it to so it's anti-government in the even though he blows up a small nation and kills a lot of people, it's he's not doing it for the American government, he's doing it for himself.
I feel like you're always going into this territory with action films like this. I think whenever you've got every action film that's we've got to take out the bad guy. I think even Marvel they had villain problems. It was we can't just, okay, the villain's bad, but why is he bad? We've got to humanize him. He's got to have a story about why he's bad. And then we spend too much time on that. And we spend so much time on the villain that the heroes are bland. So there's this ongoing thing about who's, I like the simplicity of Rambo. It's you bad, me good, explodey.
One thing I haven't talked about is the sound effects for when he's pulling back, when he's using the bow and arrow. It seems to be like a rattlesnake. I don't know. I just
think the microphone's really close to that string. Do you get that for me for a birthday? We could both go and blow some cows up or something.
I'm sure if we go to Southeast Asia, we can make that with enough dollars. We can make that happen.
I've heard that that's a thing, actually.
Have you got any of those exploding bow and arrows? No, that's Rambo, sir.
Just use the RPG and be happy. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, we've talked about Travolta as the sidekick, but I do have another coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
Coulda, woulda, shoulda is where George enlightens us into the actors or directors that were considered for this film, but for some reason just didn't get their chance. So, George, who is it? Or who are they?
So I think there's a bit of confusion on this because some people are citing that. So Dolph Lundgren was down for the role of the Russian villain in this film, but a lot of people assume that is Steven Burkoff. But in fact, it is the big henchman guy, the torturer, the guy that he fights on the helicopter, Yushin. Basically, Dolph Lundgren had auditioned for this and Rocky IV, and Stallone was like, well, there's no point being a near mute Russian heavy in this and Rocky IV. So it's do Rocky IV instead.
Yeah. Plus, can you give me Bridget's phone number?
Can I borrow Bridget's number? So yes, I think that was a dodged bullet for Dolph. because obviously, as we've talked about, it's launched his career, Rocky IV, despite that.
And he had to go and play as an extra in another film.
In 1985. Grace's boyfriend, there he is.
Grace Jones, yeah. He's like, I'll put you in this film, but could you please tell Crazy Grace to stop calling me? Can you imagine that circle of people? Like at some point, probably Christopher Walken, Grace Jones, Dolph Lundgren, Sly Stallone, Bridget Nielsen were having drinks somewhere.
And Roger Moore's there as well. Let's just throw him in.
Yeah, he's making love to all of them.
Having a sweet vermouth. So yes, I think we've said all we need to say about this film. It is daft. It is a product of its time, but I have so much fond nostalgia for it. Yes, I mean, yeah, it's not
no regrets. No regrets.
It's not as you said. It's not as silly as Commando, but it definitely ticks all those action beats that you want.
And take it from my 5-year-old daughter. It's right for any age. If they like Peppa Pig, they're gonna love this.
Love Rambo, and then obviously the Rambo is a franchise is a very uneven franchise. We talk about the first film, but it seemed like all the other films after this are kind of trying to. I mean, Rambo 3 is is probably not worth covering. Rambo 4.
Maybe we should, if we cover them again, should we just bunch them all together as the other Rambos?
You mean a bit like we did with the shit Terminator sequels?
We covered the shit Terminator sequels. I've already blanked it out. I've already
on Patreon we did on Patreon.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe it's a Patreon episode we do if our patrons are up for it.
I remember you and I going to see Rambo, the fourth one, at the cinema together, and I had to go and complain at the cinema because it was just too damn loud. I was like, these gunshots are hurting my ears.
And we were still young men. I mean, like we were in our 20s. We were in our 20s when that came out.
I'm afraid it's just too darn loud.
And I remember the other thing was like, there's so much gore in this. I love the gore. And then 30 seconds later, I was like, oh no, but it's CGI. I don't like it. I want it to be like, I want squids. I want squibs.
Or squids.
Yeah, I want squibs. So I was one part of me was like, yay, gore. The other part was like, it's not real.
Yeah.
It's not real.
And he would go on to do that that's the issue with the Expendables as well. It's all like that CGI gore, because I suppose they can tone it down or tone it up depending on what rating they want to go for.
Depending on what time of day somebody's watching it.
Yeah, exactly. You can have like sort of base levels, gore levels.
So the AI in the future will know. So like if your 5-year-old's watching it, it'll be like rainbow bubbles coming out of the character. And later at night, it's full on gore. Yeah, I love that. That'd be good. Make it happen. Silicon Valley, come on, make it happen.
Yeah.
Final thoughts? No, we've already given those, I guess. Any last words or impressions you want to give us? What's your impression of this film, George?
Yeah.
We haven't talked about Troutman. Do we need to?
We've talked about...
We talked about him a lot. If you want to hear us about our thoughts about Richard Crenna, check out coverage of Rambo First Blood, because we do talk about him a lot.
We haven't talked about... Well, speaking of Richard Crenna, we haven't talked about Hot Shots Part 2. But I think you and I were saying
Cove. By the way, no, we don't. He's not. He's basically just being the guy from Karate Kid.
Oh yeah, Martin Cove. Again, I remember him having a bigger role and being more of a shit, but he's kind of just
halfway. He's a bit misunderstood. Yeah,
he doesn't really. He's just following orders.
And the blonde guy in the shades is a bit more of a dick. So, yeah, okay.
But as we said, Creasy, I'd like to think that it is shared universe.
I think it's better if you believe it is.
Yeah.
So sidebar, George and I George and I, whenever we watch this film, as many of you of the same age might, if you like your satire films, we can't stop thinking about Hot Shots Part 2 when we watch this film. So we have both recently treaded water, and there's so many things about this that they get right.
Oh, it's brilliant. And I say the one the winning graces is the fact they get Richard Crenna back to play the exact same role. He's just called a slightly different character, but yeah, for all intents and purposes. And he's got that, I suppose it's the Lloyd Bridges, it's the Leslie Nielsen. It's the fact that he's a credited serious actor and it's still doing the deadpan. It's so good.
Yeah, it's just be the same role. And obviously, I think I forgot how much, when you think of these films, you think it's just Charlie Sheen and co. But it's not. It's the Charlie Sheen and Lloyd Bridges show. Lloyd Bridges is so many of the funny gags. We were talking about, I think I was trying to watch this subtly downstairs when everyone was in bed, and I was still late. It's we can hear you laughing upstairs, and I think that says something. We used to say this. Our mum used to say the same about Fawlty Towers. Is that it's almost rolling about on the floor laughing by yourself levels of comedy. It's but obviously it's very corner time. If you weren't around. You probably wouldn't appreciate what we're talking about, but if you remember enjoying Hot Shots, go back and check them out because they're just as funny today.
Well, yeah, I went straight from watching Rambo and then straight into Hot Shots, but yeah, I only managed the first half hour because it was quite late at night, but I'm definitely going to finish it off. But yeah, you and I were saying we might cover the Hot Shots as a double bill at some point to give them their proper due.
Well, we've done all the Top Guns, so maybe when Tom Cruise is finished with Top Gun, which should hopefully be
never
in a couple of summers, I think there's Top Gun 3 coming out.
He's still making Mission Impossible 8, Charlie.
It's a lot of reshoots,
and then they've got to send him to space for reasons.
Put him on top of a plane. He hasn't been to space yet, has he?
But he's planning to with Doug Liman, so
there you go. He's probably going to shoot about 3 films while he's up there, knowing Tom Cruise, and deliver the Olympic flame. What do you mean it won't work in space? Make it work in space. Okay, Tom. Okay, it's a vacuum. Okay. So, yeah, I think that could be a good time to go back. So we do Hot Shots 1 and 2, maybe when there's a new Top Gun film coming out. So watch this space.
Watch this space.
Speaking of watching spaces and watching your faces, what should people be checking out on our other channels? What have we got coming up on Patreon?
So Patreon, we are just about to, obviously we covered Alien over the summer in ramping up to Alien Romulus. And Charlie and I have now seen Alien Romulus. So that will, should be by the time you're listening to this, should be available on Patreon. And we'll probably be throwing up some other revelations. So revelations that we talked about it earlier are the films that Charlie and I didn't see first time round. So that's just an opportunity on our Patreon channel to discover those long lost classics that we didn't see the first time round.
Not our fault. Our parents didn't have Sky TV
for a long time. We got it eventually.
We eventually got it. We thought we sold a child and we could.
But however, next month it will be Halloween season. And I've got down on my list, Charlie, a film from 2001. It's the 10th installment in the Friday the 13th series. It's Ruddy Jason X.
Oh, my God. I'm just making X signals to George.
So that is a film we've also talked about for a long time, and we're finally going to cover. So
Jason in Space.
Jason in Space.
Let's do it. It's time. We've waited long enough. Let's do it. It's been a long time. I don't think I've watched this since that era.
Yes.
Have you gone back to it? Have you gone back to it?
No, but I have bought it on iTunes in preparation. So I think that's 4K,
Yeah. Yeah, I did the same with Hot Shots the other night. So how much? For both of them? I think that kind of does resonate because as annoying as it is to buy digital media, whenever I go into Apple, I see all of the films that I've always bought. They're still there. So I've still got Top Secret and a few other classics.
And Apple's fairly well priced. Google Play, however, is pretty crappy. Apple always do films for £3-4, and you can get them in 4K. But
I keep forgetting we've got that Google Play library. It's pretty impressive.
It is, but I say they just don't. They don't do as good deals as they do on Apple.
139.
If you're listening, Google, and you are listening, make it. Sort it out. can we fade this episode out with Frank Stallone, and then I'll be happy.
Yeah, let's just do it. Let's just do it. You know where we are. We're at retroramble.blog. We're on all the channels. You're listening to this, hopefully on a podcast in the future. How do you set up Frank? What do you want to say? Is it a short road, George?
It's not a long road, peace in our life. Frank didn't make it into the top 20 in 1985, I don't think.
But with what I went through as the top 20, it's no surprise, because what a time to be alive.
Exactly.
Well, Ramblers, thank you so much for listening. I hope you don't mind George and I indulging in our past, but hopefully this was an important film of your past, and you've enjoyed it.
It's going to prompt you to go back and rewatch it, or at least watch Hot Shots Part 2.
Watch Rambo for the second time this month. Go at it. It's worth it. So for this episode, I've been John. No, I have been Charlie McGee.
I've been George McGee.
And we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.